I want you to think of yourself. The I in the sentence, I think, therefore I am. Okay, cool. Just gonna grab that. That'll be your password, or pass thought. I'll always be able to use that to recognize you.
Hi there, welcome to my channel, or welcome back, I should say. Today I'll be talking about the TV show that I have recently discovered called Upload. It's on Amazon Prime. The reason I wanted to talk about it, to be honest, there is a lot in it. There is a lot there to unpack. The whole concept of digital afterlife is interesting in itself, and there is really a lot to talk about, the way of our relationship with technology as humanity, and also the whole idea of life and death. But I feel like today I wanted to ground it into very small fragment that occurred actually in the very first episode, but I feel like it is so telling. It is telling because it's really reflective of, I guess, the society that we live in. So in that clip, you see that in order for the consciousness to recognize itself as something, it takes the idea that you do not necessarily need that physical self, your body, and it really grounds it into the idea, I think, therefore I am. And it's like thought gives the basis to reality, which corresponds to the ancient philosopher's idea, and I believe it was Decritus who said, I think, therefore I am. And the way our society changed from then on, and that kind of identification, the age of enlightenment, and the whole identification with the mind, and it kind of became mind over matter. And I feel like even in even religion, they have had that idea fundamentally of transcending your bodily needs, but with so-called modernity and science and enlightenment, the rational mind and like logic like took precedence in a different way, the extent to which it wasn't before. And it's an interesting idea, and not something I can fully reconcile for myself, but I do believe in the idea that when we hold different thoughts in our mind, it creates a certain reality of what is true. And for myself, in my own life, in my work, in psychotherapy, I've noticed that, and I don't want to call it, make a diagnosis out of it, or call it, like, put a certain label on it, just because I'm also aware that kind of two sides of the story, the idea of like the loss of self and the self-identification as we know it, with all those images and things that come to it, does not necessarily mean the loss of self, right? And this book actually speaks about it really well, The Art of Losing Control. Haven't read the full book, but the basic idea and things that I have read, especially there is like a critique of Western culture, and there is that paragraph, or not paragraph, like sub-chapter or something, named Western Culture Problem with Ecstasy, and it talks about materialist worldview. There are no spirits or gods out there. Ecstasy is a mental delusion, and ecstasy in this context is really just self-transcendence, which could be achieved through different states. So whether that's like a drug induced, or through religious experiences or certain, you know, maybe life crisis, and the book really takes you through all those things. And I like that the book is called The Art of Losing Control, because it's really about control, and it's kind of subtly, well, not so subtly at times, but it's a subtle nudge from the title that speaks about it. But at the same time, I can see the idea of whether that's control or identification. That's something I think many people experience, and I have experienced myself, and maybe in contemporary um, worldview, in psychotherapeutic worldview, you would probably call that kind of split as, like the bipolar, or I think similar things are happening in borderline personality disorder also. But specifically what I'm talking about, and I'm going to show you my version of this clip. So what happens when you bring a certain person to mind? What if I give you more context there? What if you bring a certain person to mind who you either love or have loved really deeply? Just this sentence in itself, what pictures are popping up in your head? And I have read somewhere that we can only hold 7 things in the mind at the same time, in our immediate memory. So when you recall something or someone, if you spend a lot of time thinking about it, you might actually go through, different 7 things and construct a comprehensive picture or make certain conclusions and look through it. But really, in a momentary awareness, that's what happens. And I feel like this is really the basis of, there's this very powerful modality in therapy as well. It's called parts work, and it's that it's when you work with one part of yourself and the other part of yourself, and usually they're in conflict, and the idea is to bring it into wholeness, into unity. But to me, I feel like that split could be as extreme as and I think that's maybe when it happens, because I feel all of us do have those splits and conflicts between different parts. But when it becomes extreme, it becomes, again, I don't like using those labels, but maybe it is to an extent how it is in bipolar. And so from this first clip, you see there are those positive things. There are all those immediate positive things that come to mind. And what happens then, that picture almost freezes in motion. And ironically, when editing this video, I had to put hold, I had to freeze the frame so the things won't go away. And I feel like that's pretty much what happens oftentimes in our minds. We identify with that picture of first few immediate things that come to mind about the person. There is recency bias, right? Like sometimes it's the most recent things that come forefront. There is a confirmation bias, right? Like it's when you want a certain outcome, or you're so attached to how the picture should be that it's on an autopilot. Like your mind selects the pictures that fit the mental picture that you want it to be, basically. Even if in reality there is red squares and outnumber green ones by tenfold, and you will see where the red ones come in right now. So what if I tell you to think about that same person who have who you have really loved or who you love, and also who have hurt you. What comes to mind? You know, it depends on the context when this is brought up in your life. And also, you know, so for instance, if you mention this person straight after the argument, your perception of them is different to your perception of them after having a nice day out together and, like, you know, just feeling super connected and loved. And that those shifts in perspectives are normal. They're human. They very much correspond to our emotions, right? But what happens in mind identification, in certain stuckness of the mind, that's how I would describe it, is that the picture becomes very fragmented. Like, you are very fragmented, and then that's like you are just in one part of yourself that knows this reality of this person and nothing else. And then you go into a different part of yourself, and that's when you know only the other reality of that person and nothing else. And I think the adult self, the wholeness self, the higher self, I don't know how else to call it, but this real integration of those conflict happens is when you're able to hold all those conflicting things, emotions, and parts together. And a lot of times it's not just the parts of the other person, it's very much the parts of you. It's ability to hold your own different fragments and parts of yourself that might be in conflict together. And what does it mean? What does it make you? And I feel like as I'm speaking to this, as I'm making this video, I'm also realizing how this example of the psyche, this example of, you know, inner conflict, of holding those pieces together, of, you know, conflicting emotions and situations based like with one person, one experience, but it's the same person, and seeing them so starkly different. And then how that is a reflection of your self and your inner conflict with your own fragments, right? Like, so it's like a mirror, right? But then that in itself is very interesting to me, because I'm like, but what is that mirror reflecting? And that is a reflection of a bigger societal societal, the bigger conflict in a society. And I feel like the conflict is that society that is really much based on the rules of competition, where, you know, when what happens when you put red squares together with green ones, I feel like it's our brain is almost like primed to, it's like, well, which ones outnumber which ones? Because even when I was making it, I was like, oh, it's 7. So how many do I make green and how many do I make red? And does it mean if there is more green than red, does it mean that what does it mean, right? Like, does it mean the positive perception wins? Is that how it works? Are those things that just immediate? What are all other things that we're not bringing up to memory right now, right? And I think that's what often happens as well, like the way memory functions and how we think a lot of times in associations, right? Like, you have an argument that triggers something and then brings those things up. And then, but sometimes it's very unconscious as well, right? Like, you might have start using perfume from 2 years ago, and 2 years ago you have been going through a very difficult period with this particular person, and now automatically, even though right now it's might be positive, like, or somehow those things are being brought up to the memory. And fundamentally it's like, okay, when I hold them, like those different things together, those red and green squares, I think the question still remains, it's like, what do I do with those things? It's kind of, and I think this is the real skill, is that ability to hold things together. And yeah, and not really, it's not about competition or one thing winning over another, right? Like, it's not about one part of you or another part of you kind of having its way. It's about you bringing them into wholeness, and it's you really having to look at those things and sort them together. And when I mean sort them, it's really like prioritize them, discernment, kind of being like, okay, this is really, really, like, it's not like this is really, really bad, but this really matters to me because this is connected to my values. And this has really impacted me in some ways. But this is also such a great memory, and I think it speaks to this person, who he is as a person, or who they are as a person. So its ability to kind of put those things together, sort through them, and then create a picture, create a mental picture that is not reliant, I guess, on that competition. It's not reliant on one part taking over the other, one part winning over the other. It's really about that integration and being able to say, kind of like, I love you, but to being able to say that this is great, but you know, and I mean, it's not like literal like this, but in a sense that sometimes, you know, certain things matter more than others, and certain things matter less than others. It's the ability to say, you know what, this has been a difficult experience, but, and to find the silver lining. And I feel like, in the end of the day, though, it's not about the silver lining. It's not about, like, oh, estimating the amount of pleasure versus pain and making that kind of judgment. It's really detailed, and it's really intricate in some way. It really goes back to, it makes you to kind of, while it's very detailed, it's also like makes you to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. It's like, what does it, what values of mine does it respond to? What values I might be compromising? What kind of person I want to be, and why it's important for me to uphold this value, and why is it okay for me to maybe be flexible in this one. It's, you know, like, for instance, for someone who is really learning patience and compassion, maybe it might be actually important to, I wouldn't say to disregard one of its values, but to loosen its boundaries, and you know, with certain behaviors of other people, learn to be less reactive, and yeah, like being able to hold space for their experience. So that's where I say it's very detailed, it's very context based, it's very situation based. There is no, like, there's no formula of like, yeah, you just 1 + 1 and that equals 2, and then there is 1, and you know, that's it. It's not as easy, and I feel like, yeah, like, I feel that's, I don't want to say that, I don't want to bring it back to the conversation of consciousness and the conversation of I think therefore I am. I don't want to say that everything that we think constructs reality, right? Because there is even more details and intricacy in that. It's like, well, I think, you know, like, even in the things I put, it was just like a sticky notes. It was just one sentence, because there is like, when you see it in your mind as a picture, the day we met, it's not just the day we met. It's not even sometimes the emotions you have felt in the moment. It's also accumulation of emotions and meaning that happen in between. And I don't want to say they're not real, but I feel like there is depth to all those things, and in that depth is really also ability to investigate and to kind of pull things apart of like, those things are true. um, how did I actually feel then? Like, it's really an opportunity to like, have I induced some meanings in, you know, and the stuff that, not that it was not meaningful, but it's important to detach, like, and pull things apart to really see the picture so focused and so detailed, um, to know you're making, I guess, the decision that is really aligned. Because in the end of the day, you can have all kinds of thoughts, and I think this is the biggest struggle with that inner conflict. If you swing from one side to the other all the time, it's like your perception of yourself, actually too, of the world, of other people, changes like this from one extreme to the other. It's very hard to show up consistently. Like, it's almost like you have to you show up in two different ways, and things becomes really confusing for people and also for you, because like, how are you supposed to make decisions, and how are you supposed to have that trust with yourself? Because it's like, when you're in one part, you trust that part and you act from it, and then you other parts, you trust that part and you act from it, and then but then you're like, but then you're also confronted with the idea of like, well, I know that other parts would do this, so which one is right? And I feel like there is really no right answer, but there is the answer, and certain, I guess, contentness that could be found through living according to your values, through making decisions that actually get you further along to where you want to be, you know. And I didn't think that this video was going to come to this, but I really want to think, I think this is where I want to emphasize the importance of inner work and psychotherapy, because, and I think this is also like a very good example of how different therapies like differ. I think CBT, or a lot of like counseling, is a lot about digging so deep into the details of a very specific situation, you know, and in that situation it's just kind of like, okay, so how could you act different in that specific situation, and like maybe making a certain conclusion about that situation. But a lot of times it's so disintegrated from the bigger whole, like it's kind of missing that um, bigger picture pattern and perspective of, well, on patterns, but also on like why am I choosing this as well? Because sometimes, and I think I have followed that for a while, like I came to follow um, an idea that I should always be comfortable in the recent couple years. And ironically, it came from therapy in some way, because I used to make myself extremely uncomfortable, I would say, by going for everything. It's like, if I'm scared, I'm gonna go for it. I think that's how my brain worked, and also in a way, you know, from wanting to try everything there is to try in life. And that idea of being uncomfortable it has served me well, to be honest. It has served me well because even when I wasn't focused on inner work, or like I wasn't trying to better myself in any way, but I was just going for things because I was like, oh, this sounds both exciting and scary, let me try it, kind of thing. So it got me to a lot of places. It got me to therapy, it got me to try a lot of things, but I think I swapped that idea of, well, I should always be comfortable because I'm feeling all this anxiety and stuff. So instead, let me, like, I kind of unconsciously swapped it with a different belief, and doing some kind of inquiry, I feel, oh, well, that belief actually came from therapy in a way, because it was just like, why'd you go there? And I'm just like, I don't know why do I go there, why do I do this? And I kind of started asking myself, and I didn't really have a bigger why. My bigger why was just to try, just to like really make myself uncomfortable. And while I feel neither of them were a solution, but I think like undoing those thoughts and undoing those beliefs together really made me realize, like, well, I don't need to have either of those beliefs. I like being comfortable, who doesn't? But I also want to grow and be uncomfortable sometimes. But it really has to be connected to bigger values and things that I want in life. So if I have a commitment to inner work in that field, I might make myself uncomfortable. If I have a commitment to spending more time in nature, I might make myself uncomfortable, like say going camping or something, right? But if I would say I have a commitment to dancing. I love dancing, but I wouldn't say I love it that much that I would go to a 3-day festival 3 days in a row. Just like I don't feel like I have a bigger why for that. Like I don't love music or like artists or anyone like who I would want to see so much that I would do that. Just like no. Um, I kind of feel like I would spend my time doing other things. Um, so I also might have a commitment to try new things. So if it was like a first time of me going, I might still make a decision to go. But you see like how it's much more deeper and context orientated. Um, yeah. So this is where I'll leave it with, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and yeah, check out the upload series. They're really cool. I'll make more videos on them for sure. Thank you. Bye.